Welcome to the Metabolic Classroom. I'm Professor Benjamin Bikman, a biomedical scientist and professor of cell biology. Today, we're discussing a topic that I've brought up a few times in the past, but it continues to make waves in the realm of weight loss, and so I find myself continuing to speak about it. Namely, we're going to be talking again about GLP-1 receptor agonists, or these drugs that are sometimes just called GLP-1s. You have heard of them, whether you know it or not. This includes drugs like Ozempic, Wegovy, Mounjaro. These are drugs that have doctors and dieters who are interested in weight loss buzzing about their ability to promote remarkable weight loss, and they are everywhere. But are we moving too fast? Is there a better way to use them? I've previously discussed some natural ways to leverage GLP-1 as a hormone and have it work a little better for us, but is there a way to have the drugs themselves work a little better for us? So over the course of the mini lecture, we'll start with the basics, what GLP-1 is and how it works in your body. Then we'll explore the downsides, including mental health risks, lean mass loss, diminishing effects, and some digestive issues. All of this, of course, will be backed by some robust peer-reviewed studies. From there, I'll outline what I consider to be a practical plan, using GLP-1 drugs at a better dose with a very specific purpose, as I'll get into in a bit. Now, let's get started. Just by way of reminder, because I'm talking about a drug, don't take anything I say as a prescription. I'm not your clinician. I'm just your friendly neighborhood scientist, and that is my approach. All right, GLP-1 stands for, as you know, glucagon-like peptide 1. It's a hormone produced in the gut, and it's released generally when we eat food. Then when food hits our stomach and starts to pass into the small intestine, GLP-1 will step in as it's released into the bloodstream with three key effects. First, it signals the pancreas to inhibit the release of glucagon. Now, you've already heard that word. Remember, GLP-1 stands for glucagon-like peptide. So it acts in such a way to inhibit the release of glucagon, which helps to lower the amount of glucose that is coming from the liver and thereby lowers blood glucose levels. That's why, at its earliest use, these drugs were primarily posited as ways to help with diabetes. Second, it slows gastric emptying. Food stays in your stomach longer, which makes you feel full for longer. And then the third effect is a little similar, but it is distinct. Now the GLP-1 has a signal, in this instance, right to your brain, particularly the hypothalamus, and it tells the brain to turn down hunger. It's a natural regulator, as a result, of appetite and metabolism. Now, GLP-1 receptor agonists, the drug, are synthetic versions of this hormone. So this is drugs like semaglutide or liraglutide. If you hear the glutide ending, that's going to fall into this family. What they all have in common is that they mimic GLP-1, but they stick around much longer than GLP-1 itself does, sometimes days or even a week. That longevity boosts their impact, the longevity in the life of the hormone. Glucagon stays a bit lower for longer, stomach emptying slows, and appetite is going to be better controlled. It shrinks. No surprise with all of these effects that people can lose significant weight, up to 15 to 20% of body weight, which is remarkable, but it does come with trade-offs. Let's look at those. And we're going to use that as justification to present a bit more of a nuanced, but nevertheless rigorously backed perspective. Now, before going further, let's dig into something that is fascinating from some of the early research into GLP-1. Way back in 1996, which was a wonderful year to graduate high school and a wonderful year for a seminal discovery in the realm of GLP-1. This study revealed that folks wrestling with obesity have a blunted GLP-1 response to carbohydrates. Think about that for a second. Carbs, the macronutrient that dominates most modern plates, to be very clear, up to 70% of all calories consumed globally come from carbohydrates. They barely nudge GLP-1, the satiety hormone, in these individuals who are struggling with obesity. Importantly, when you compared that response in the obese individuals to the GLP-1 response to carbohydrates in the lean individuals, it was fantastically different. The GLP-1 response in the lean individuals was significant. It went up considerably, multiple times over the fasting state. And yet in the obese individuals, it was a little noisy. It wasn't a flat line, but it was not statistically significant in any kind of movement. It's as if their bodies are saying, keep eating, we're not full yet, even as the bread basket continues to get emptier. To me, this is more than just a quirk. It's a clue. If carbs don't trigger that I'm satisfied signal via GLP-1 as effectively in those who struggle with obesity, it's no wonder they're so easy to overeat. These carbohydrates, things like pasta, potatoes, pastries, all of these carbs that can come in bags and boxes with barcodes, they become a bit of a silent saboteur. It screams of an opportunity for GLP-1 based strategies. Imagine leveraging these drugs or even pairing them with some clever dietary shifts to amplify that satiety response specifically to carbs. We could help people feel fuller, faster, and longer, turning a metabolic weakness into a weapon against overeating. That's the kind of precision I believe we need to explore, unlocking GLP-1's potential to tame, if you will, a carving beast, which is an apt way of describing the way some people feel. Now, why do we need this more nuanced approach? It's because at its currently used doses, in other words, how these GLP-1 drugs are currently used to promote weight loss, there are some considerable consequences that are often undiscussed. Let's explore them. First up, mental health. Some eye-opening results just came out a few months ago at the time of this recording, at the end of 2024, a study in Scientific Reports that provides some sobering statistics. They found that these GLP-1 drugs, while they are metabolic darlings for tackling obesity, this was challenged, the positive outcomes in what is a massive cohort study with over roughly about 160,000 matched patients on each side, on the drug or off the drug. And the consequences really does pull back the curtain to a darker side of these drugs. To be clear, we're talking a 98% jump in psychiatric disorders overall, including 195% more major depression, 108% more anxiety, and 106% spike in suicidal behavior on those in those who use the drugs compared to controls. This is not a lab experiment either. It's a real world result. This is from data obtained over a period of 2015 to 2023. Now, it is correlational, of course. I need to emphasize this. I am the first to criticize correlational data, but insofar as correlational data is used to establish popular approaches and public health strategies, it's apt, I think, to cite it here. The results, though, collectively show us that while these drugs might shrink our waistlines, they could also rattle minds, especially in folks with a shaky mental health history, especially even further in the midst of what many are considering a mental health crisis. It is a wake-up call. Metabolic wins don't come free, and we've got to weigh these risks. One way I personally look at this is that these drugs do indeed reduce cravings for carbohydrates or just food in general, something we'll revisit in a moment. But what if they also reduce cravings or general interest in hobbies that a person once enjoyed? They used to enjoy, for example, eating junk food, but they also enjoyed playing pickleball with friends or playing video games or anything else. Interest in all of these activities seems more muted. Perhaps this plays into the worsening mental health. Next up, as a consequence that suggests we need a nuanced approach, is lean mass loss. When you drop weight quickly, say 20 pounds in a few months, Not all of it is fat. A 2021 study in the New England Journal of Medicine, part of the Step 1 trial, found that up to 40% of weight lost on semaglutide was lean mass. Now, while this certainly also includes water, it still includes other more precious resources like muscle and connective tissues. Muscle, just as a reminder, is a real metabolic defender, given its ability to consume substantial amounts of blood glucose, helping blood glucose stay under better control and, as a consequence, helping the body be more insulin sensitive. But muscle is also possibly the most protective organ that defends us from the frailties of aging. Lose too much muscle and you risk frailty and compromising metabolic health down the road. That's a problem that we need to tackle. Then there's the issue of fading effects or diminishing returns. These drugs work well to reduce cravings and control appetite until they don't. A 2022 trial in Nature Medicine, the Step 5 study, showed that after 2 years, hunger and sweet cravings returned to pre-drug levels, even while still on the drug. Participants started regaining weight, about a third of what they'd lost back by the end of the trial. Your body seems to adapt over time, which means the initial benefits might not last forever. So it becomes a problem that needs to be addressed eventually. Finally, as I'm wrapping up the cause for consideration and why I am presenting an alternative approach in the first place, there's the problem of digestion. These GLP-1 drugs slow stomach emptying to curb appetite, but it can go too far. A study in Gastroenterology, a preeminent journal in the gut realm, looked at real-world data and linked high-dose semaglutide to gastroparesis, a condition where the stomach stalls. It's like it becomes paralyzed. Food sits too long, and issues like bacterial overgrowth can arise. Some patients, of course, will result or report that this results in the typical nausea, bloating, or even constipation that in some instances is severe enough to disrupt their lives, in fact, even risk their lives. Digestion and the movement of the guts is too important to mess with. Disrupt it too much, and you are in trouble. All right, now that I've outlined all of the considerations that I point a finger to because I believe they are overlooked too often, you may conclude that I'm suggesting that GLP-1 drugs are just a bad idea. I don't mean to imply that. Not necessarily. They're tools, powerful but imperfect. The trick is using them for the right job, and that brings me to carbohydrate cravings. Food addiction research points to processed carbs, so that is sugars and refined starches, as a major driver of overeating. A good study in 2013 published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition showed that sugary foods trigger more activity in the brain's reward centers than other macronutrients like fats or proteins do. This dopamine surge makes them very hard to resist, setting up a cycle of cravings. I suspect you intuitively know this. You don't crave protein and fat. You crave something sweet and gooey or salty and crunchy, and refined carbohydrates will be the common denominator. In other words, no one is sitting around on a Saturday night about to enjoy a movie and wishing they could be chomping on a stick of butter. No, it's always going to be something based in carbohydrates. GLP-1 drugs can, I believe, help break that cycle. A 2016 study in Appetite found that liraglutide, one of the earlier GLP-1 drugs but still used, reduced cravings for sweets and starches more than other foods. It did this by altering the brain activity in areas tied to reward and appetite, giving people a leg up against those carb-driven urges. That, I believe, should be the focus, not just necessarily maximizing weight loss, but managing the cravings to carbohydrates, and importantly, at the lowest possible dose. In fact, let's come to more strategy. What can we do? Well, here's my suggestion, a practical evidence-based approach. Step 1, start low. Work with your clinician. Try to find the lowest effective dose that works. Maybe that's going to be 0.25 milligrams of semaglutide rather than the typically prescribed 2.4 milligrams. So maybe about a tenth of the normal dose will be enough. To me, the goal shouldn't be to starve yourself, to have no hunger. The goal should be to regain control over carbohydrate cravings. Step 2, you need to protect your muscle. Add resistance training, lifting weights or doing body weight exercises, whatever fits, as often as you can, 3 to 4 times a week. A 2022 study in an exercise journal showed that resistance training can preserve lean mass even during weight loss, and even when that weight loss is occurring through some degree of calorie restriction. Not that I'm ever an advocate of such a direct approach. While this particular study that I have in the show notes didn't test GLP-1 drugs specifically, the principle still holds. Muscle work counters the loss we see with rapid weight drops. We want to keep the metabolic engine running and rapidly consuming glucose and pushing off the many negative effects of aging. Step 3, rethink your plate. Go low carb, so control carbs, prioritize protein, and don't fear fat. So think things like eggs and steak and fermented dairy like yogurt, rather than eating, as is so common, bread or pasta or drinking or eating sugary treats. Protein helps with satiety. It also helps with metabolic rate through the thermic effect of food, and it has little to no insulin effect. Fat also is a good source of energy and a good source of essential molecules like essential fatty acids, and also it has no effect on insulin. A 2021 meta-analysis, so a study that surveyed all of the available clinical studies, was published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, and it found that low-carb diets outperform others for weight loss and metabolic health, especially when insulin resistance is involved. This is important because the average individual who's struggling with obesity, which makes them interested in these drugs in the first place, is very, very likely also struggling with insulin resistance. These GLP-1 drugs could make sticking to this strategy easier by quitting those carb surges. Step 4, and the final of these 4 steps, cycle off. My suggestion, after 3 to 6 months, in collaboration with your clinician, consider a plan to taper down the drug and then stop. Use this as a time to test yourself. Can you resist these old triggers? If you can, great. Then this has become a habit. The drug, what was a syringe-induced self-discipline, has become integrated into your behavior. Now you have the control and you don't need the drug to help you with it. But if the cravings start to return, cycle back on it for a short stint. The aim is independence from the drug eventually, rather than a lifelong reliance. Of course, all of this is intended for you to be conversing and collaborating with your clinician. Now, before I wrap up, I want to talk about or spend some time talking about the newer player in this space, although it's been out for a while, and that is the dual GLP-1 and GIP or GIP receptor agonists. This is encompassed in drugs like Tirzepatide, for example. These drugs hit both the GLP-1 receptor and the GIP receptor. That's another gut hormone that plays a role in all of this. A 2016 study in Diabetologia, a very prominent journal in this metabolism space, showed that liraglutide was able to improve cravings for carbohydrates by activating various brain reward centers. But this dual agonist, Tirzepatide, could take it even further. In particular, a trial that was published in 2022 found that Tirzepatide slashed body weight significantly more than just the single GLP-1 like semaglutide. It was a large reduction, in which certainly suggests that the combination of these two is perhaps even a little better at dialing down hunger. But GIP's role is not as well defined as GLP-1's. So my prudent take, I suggest, still applies. If you've been prescribed that dual agonist in collaboration with your clinician, explore the possibility of starting with a low dose used with the explicit purpose of controlling carbohydrate cravings without going too far. Remember, the purpose isn't reducing hunger to the point of starvation. My suggestion is that the purpose should be based on the one macronutrient we're struggling with the most: carbohydrates. We don't have long-term data on how GIP or GIP affects mood or muscle, like some of the other consequences I mentioned earlier. But again, I submit that the same rule holds here. Lift weights, you keep carbs low, and then cycle off to see what sticks after a few months. In other words, essentially learn what it looks like and feels like to eat in a way where carbohydrates aren't dominating your mind or dominating your plate. The quick fixes are tempting. I get it. I really do. And GLP-1 drugs do offer that promise, and they deliver, at least for a while. But in my mind, improving metabolic health is not a sprint. It's a long game. The studies we covered show real risks, including mental health challenges, muscle loss, fading results, and digestive woes. That's not victory if you're worse off in 10 years. This approach, low dose combined with resistance exercise, combined with low carb diet and cycling off and then back on if needed, lets you use the strength of the drug without, I submit, some of the consequences and the fallout. You target carb cravings at their root, and ideally you build habits that are going to last beyond your reliance or use of the drug. It's not flashy, but I believe it's grounded in what we know from physiology and research. Now, as I wrap up, I just wanted to highlight some of the common questions that I've gotten on this topic over the years as these drugs have become so popular. One common question is, why not just stay on the drug? I hope I've made that clear. In addition to the financial cost, which is considerable, there's also the health effects. That step 5 trial that I mentioned earlier showed that weight can creep back on. But remember, if some of that weight that has been lost is coming from muscle and bone, while the weight can creep back on, it's unlikely the muscle and bone mass or the lean mass is creeping back on. What's creeping back on is the body fat. So as a percent of your body mass, you may be fatter, even if you still are a few pounds lighter. Now, some may ask, well, what if I don't like weights? I don't want to go weightlifting. What can I do? That's fine. The most important exercise is the one you will do, but you need to be fatiguing or tiring out your muscles. So if you don't want to leave your home, try doing squats up and down on your chair to keep those big muscles of your legs engaged. Just do push-ups from your knees or from your toes. Just walking with some resistance bands, that you are doing some resistance movements with these stronger, thicker elastic bands. Do anything you can to be tiring out your muscles. And then, of course, eating well. And so the next part of this, I often, when I present these ideas, people will wonder about the nature of carbs. Are all carbs bad? No, I'm not suggesting that. My general view is the ones I mentioned earlier, things like pastries, pasta, be careful with them. Or as I like to say, if the carbs come in bags and boxes with a barcode, avoid them. Focus on whole fruits and vegetables, eat them, don't drink them. So you want to scrutinize, what is this carbohydrate going to do to lighting up my brain and feeding my addiction? Is broccoli going to feed your addiction? Probably not. So those are carbohydrates that I believe are going to be more useful. That's it for today. Over the course of this mini lecture, we've unpacked the GLP-1 drugs, highlighted their hurdles with some real evidence, and then mapped what I consider to be a smarter path. Low dose craving control, muscle preservation, all with the intention of helping you learn to control carbs, and then as you can, in collaboration with your clinician, cycling off the drug and then monitoring behavior. I bet you know someone who's on these drugs, or you may even be. Share this message with them if you found it helpful, and I hope it has been. Until next time, more knowledge, better health.